All right, kids, so welcome back. This is Mr. DeCecco again, and we're going to take you through the decades following kind of the first five, six presidents and get you right up to the pre-Civil War period. So let's get it going, all right? What this is called is national unity and splits. So what we have here is before the Civil War, there's certain things that are happening that are helping the nation come together, bringing us together, making us unified. There are also some forces that are splitting the nation, tearing us apart. So some things are bringing us together, some things are tearing us apart. All right. As we go through, you might want to come back to this slide and take a peek at this. These are some major events that kind of happened between 1820 to 1865. And if you were to, prepare yourself for an exam or a test on U.S. history, these are, certain events that you might want to be aware of. And they're all in chronological order. Nice little timeline. Maybe you come back to this, you jot down some little notes for yourself as to, why these events are important. So that's just something to help you guys. All right. What are the things bringing us together, unifying the United States? Well, first of all, we have the first and second two-party systems. All right. And what those are is we're talking about political parties. These things were national, meaning that everybody kind of knew who those political parties were, and they kind of allied themselves with one or the other party. They weren't sectional. There wasn't like a political party up in the Northeast and one down south. Those will kind of split off and happen later on. All right. The first two-party system that you should be aware of is the first two political parties that happened while Washington was the president. Right. The Federalists are kind of your bigger, more powerful, rich, elitist type political party. And then you have your Democratic Republicans. These would be your Jeffersonian people. These would be your kind of more the common man political party, all right? The second two-party system really comes about during after the age of Andrew Jackson, right? In 1834, the Whigs kind of are developed, and they kind of replace the Federalists. So the Federalists are going to die out by the James Madison days, and then these Whigs kind of take over as the Federalists. I'll show you a timeline in a minute so you can see that, right? The Whig Party really developed to oppose Andrew Jackson, right? They really hated Andrew Jackson and anything he stood for, right? What do political parties do? They run campaigns to attract interest, increase the number of people voting, get people out there, mobilize the vote, and they're involved in the national issues. They're in tune to what's happening on the national scale. So that would be your kind of political parties in terms of the beginning, right? Nice little chart here. I found this online. Obviously, it's a slide. You can't really read it, but if you look for this online, a timeline of political parties, it does a phenomenal job. All right. The beginning, we have obviously George is in the middle here, tied to no political party. Jefferson and John Adams. You have the Democratic Republican era, all the way up to like the James Monroe, and then you have the John Adams. These are your big time Federalists for the time period. And once we get to the James Monroe era, you might remember the era of good feelings. So for a while, there's one political party. And very shortly, by 1824, there's going to be that split again. You got Jackson up top, and you have John Quincy Adams down below. And thus begins that era of the two different political parties again. So for a while, that era of good feelings, we just have one. Great slide. All right. The vocabulary I threw out there for you. I know for my guys, I want you to take some time on the slide, copy the vocab, and study it. So you can pause that if you want to. What are some other factors that are bringing America together? We've got to talk about the market economy here. And obviously interstate commerce. Both of these are going to help stimulate the economy. All right. There were tremendous revolutions in transportation, new technologies, which led to industrialization and urbanization. Two words absolutely positively you must know, right? Industrialization is the building up of our factory system and the building up of production centers, and urbanization is the movement of people from farms to cities, right? Urban centers. So think of urban centers as city dwelling, right? Specialization was possible, and now people could purchase what they could not make or could not grow. So what specialization is it's another one of those vocab terms where you're not making the product from beginning to end. You're not completing the finished end of the product. You're only doing one part of that process in a factory. And therefore, what you're doing is you're trading your labor for cash, then you're taking that cash and going and buying what you need. When we develop this market economy, banks are going to be very important because they're going to provide the loans, they're going to provide the money for business adventures and business increasing their opportunities and increasing their production. So southern and western crops, those are going to be your farming centers. So when you think about the south and the west, those are going to be your places where the crops are grown, and they're going to exchange, they're going to sell their crops, and then they're going to continue to buy northern manufactured goods, whether it be a dresser, a tractor, whatever it is, right? So there's kind of a two-way trade here between south and west and northeast, all right? Love this little chart right here. So this is the old system, and this is what was mentioned as the market economy. The old way, people made everything in their home. The new way, they're going to leave their home, they're going to go work in a factory, and then goods are going to be sold on the open market. Whereas the old system, goods were made primarily to be used at home. People didn't go far. They didn't leave their home. They were self-sufficient, and that changes with the rise of the market economy. This is happening in the early 1800s. All right. We got to talk about the Marshall Court. All right. John Marshall, second Supreme Court judge. Absolutely, you must know John Marshall. These three cases in the beginning were of such importance that I can't even tell you. All right. First one being Marbury versus Madison. Set up the Supreme Court's power of judicial review. All right, so any exam you're taking in U.S. history, that's going to be on there. So you absolutely must know. Marbury versus Madison is the Supreme Court's power of reviewing federal laws, reviewing state laws, reviewing presidential actions, and determining whether we're going to do those things or not. All right. The other one is McCullough versus Maryland. All right, great case. The federal government creates a national bank. They have a national bank, and Maryland begins to tax it. They begin to tax the bank very heavily with special currency, and but obviously this was challenged in the court. And basically, the court said that the federal law is supreme over state laws. Federal actions are supreme over state actions. So could the state of Maryland destroy the federal government's national bank? The easy answer to that is absolutely not. They can't. They don't have that power. Dartmouth College versus Woodward was again in the early 1800s. Dartmouth College was a college who obtained a charter during the colonial period. So they're able to operate as a business because they have permission. And that was being challenged in the early 1800s. And what the Supreme Court said is, we want people to do business. So what the Supreme Court ruled here is in the validity of contracts. If you have a contract, if two parties are willing to engage in a contract, that's a legal agreement. It should be okay in America, and that's what we're going to do. And a contract is real simple. One party's going to do something, another party's going to pay for something, and there's an exchange of some form of goods or services. Right? So that's what Dartmouth College did. The last big one is Gibbons versus Ogden, and this happens in New York State, our state. And what happened in New York is one company asked for permission from New York State to be the only people to use the Hudson River. And they got that permission, and that was challenged, and another ferry boat company said, hey man, we want to use the river as well. And basically what the federal government did is they looked at the Hudson River, and they found that the Hudson River travels between multiple states. What our Supreme Court and what our Constitution actually says is Congress controls interstate trade. New York State does not. So what that did is it expanded or kind of restated that the federal government controls interstate trade. What part of the federal government? That would specifically be Congress. Now, when you look at all of these decisions, an easy thing to do in the early 1800s when you're looking at the time period is look at John Marshall. He will always decide that court, the Marshall Court, will always view things in favor of the federal government, not the states, not the people. The federal government has power. So a quick rule of thumb here. These decisions by Marshall are going to increase the power and role of the federal government. That government's going to be getting more power under the Marshall Court, not less power. All right. Let's talk about some other things bringing us together. All right. There's something known as the American system. Who organized it? Who came up with the idea? He was a congressman from Kentucky, Henry Clay. John Quincy Adams does support this program, and it is the American system. You should know about it. You should know what it does for America, right? Basically, this program is going to benefit specifically the North and the West. How? Let's go through it, all right? We're going to build a really good transportation system to aid trade and national defense. We're going to be able to move around the country really easy in this country because of the American system. So what does it entail? Roads, railroads, canals. Federal government's going to spend money to build transportation systems. I'll show you in a minute. All right. The other thing is that Henry Clay wanted to continue to protect our factories. Well, how can we do that? We impose a tariff. Now, a tariff, you should know, is a tax on a foreign product. So we're going to make foreign products more expensive so that the factories that are producing things in America, the goods they're producing are being bought, they're being sold. Those factories are making money. They're going to hire more people, and that's going to be good for America, right? Also, what's going to help manufacturing are those transportation networks that we're already building. So that's nice. The last thing is we're going to create a national bank. The federal government's going to have this institution called the National Bank to provide that support. What kind of support? Financial support. So if you needed money, you can go to this national bank and borrow money and build a factory and continue producing and hire people, and that's what's going to be good for America. So in short, if you want to know about the American system, you should know it's proposed by Henry Clay. We're going to build transportation, we're going to have tariffs, we're going to have banks. So TTB maybe, transportation, tariff, and banks. There's a definition of the American system if you need it. There you go. Let's talk industry. Where are these early factories going to be? Obviously found in the north, right? First of all, the Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain. It did not begin in America, but America will be the second country to experience this great event, and we are going to be producing, all right? What happened in Great Britain is that they built these steam engines, and these machines were used to spin thread and weave cloth. So your early factories are going to be textile mills that build cloth, blankets, clothes, whatever, right? By the 1800s, we seem to have found and created these technologies in America. So if we can build steam engines and we can build our factories by waterways, well, we're going to start building these things just like Great Britain did, all right? Where are you going to find these factories? Up in the north. So you're going to find them up in New England. Why? What does the north have? They have iron, they have coal, they have flowing rivers to power machinery. We have immigrants moving into this country who are moving into these cities who are going to do the work. So really you're going to find this up in New England. Why aren't these immigrants moving down south? There are no jobs because of slave labor, all right? I'll give you an idea of an early textile mill in New England. You have the water wheel, so the river is flowing this way. It turns the water wheel, and then that continues to spin these pulleys, and these pulleys control these power that's for all these machines. And you start with little cotton balls, you build thread, then you build these little, you have cotton balls. Here's the bales of cotton coming into the factory. You make thread, you eventually make fabric, and then you got these long sheets of fabric, and you may turn that into, I don't know, whatever you want, a blanket, a t-shirt, whatever. Right, and these Lowell mills are going to be found up in New England, right? By 1860, by the Civil War, northern factories are competing with worldwide markets. We are really producing a lot, so the north is in the game, right? What is going on down in the south and the west? Well, it's agriculture, it's farming, all right? The north will become an urban manufacturing and commercial powerhouse, all right? Well, I'm talking, if you're in the north, you're talking about banks, you're talking factories, urban centers, city living, lots of people. That's what's going on up north, all right? 70% of our nation's manufacturing was done up north. Just throwing a stat there so you got it. If you need the definition of industrial revolution, boom, you got it, all right? What's going on with transportation? We mentioned that we're going to build transportation systems, but in terms of, what were they? So to give an idea of what's happening in the early 1800s, here's some transportation stuff, all right? There were definitely some new technologies, innovations, and inventions happening. The northern markets needed to be connected to the western farmlands. Western migration was accelerating. People are moving out west, they got to have a way to get there. They're farming out west, they got to have a way to get their product from the west to the cities of the east. So a natural two-way trade begins here, all right? And the first type of big transportation networks built were canals. They encouraged the growth of industry, they worked, they helped with shipping, they lowered shipping costs. The biggest one completed in 1825 was the Erie Canal, and that spawned the growth of other canals. What will replace canals maybe by like the 1840s, 1850s is railroads. Why? You could obviously continue to use the rail lines in the winter. You can't use the canal during the winter months if they freeze. So railroads were even more productive, easier to use than canals. So 1820s, 1830s, we're building canals. 1840s, 1850s, we're building railroads, right? This gives you a shot of kind of, what the Erie Canal did. It connected Buffalo here to Albany, which is right here. This black line is not the Erie Canal. That is the Hudson River. So a lot of students sometimes make the mistake of saying, well, the Erie Canal connected Buffalo to New York City. No, no, no. The Erie Canal connected Buffalo to Albany. Then you hop on the Hudson River and go down to New York City. Now you're out in the ocean. All right. There is the Erie Canal. So you got Buffalo. There it is. Followed up through Lockport all the way over. And where does it stop? Albany, New York. Then you hop on the Hudson River. What I like about this map is the Erie Canal was built in 1825. After that, all these other canals were built. So all these blue lines are canals. Did they work? Yes. Did we build them? Absolutely. All right. This song is showing you kind of rail lines. So railroads by 1850, railroads added the red lines by 1861. But why I like to show students this map here is really where are all the railroads being built? From the east to the west, to these farms, to the cities. And there's really not a lot of development happening down south. Maybe could be a cause of the Civil War, all right? So changes in transportation, I got four of you. I got steam, roads, canals, and railroads. So obviously steam power, who's the name you want to know? Robert Fulton. He created the first commercial steamboat. Steamships are important because they can go both upriver and down the river. They can go against the water or with the water, the way the water is traveling. And there's power so you can move faster. So there's my boy Robert Fulton. There's an example of an early steamboat. It's called the Claremont. Really good information, really nice. Moving on. Roads. Our federal government begins to take tax dollars to build roads. All right, 1833, the Cumberland Road is the first national road, and that goes from Maryland to Ohio. New roads are going to be added because people are traveling and we have to get products around. So there is the Cumberland Road, the first national road. Once again, if you kind of get a feel for where it's transporting people or products from the east, from the cities of the east to the west. You don't see that national road being built down south, possibly a cause of the Civil War. All right. Canals, already mentioned, Erie Canal connected Lake Erie to New York City via the Hudson River. And I kind of showed you that map already of the Erie Canal, so you got that. By 1820s, definitely by the 1840s, we start ripping out railroad lines. So if you ever played the game Monopoly, the B&O railroad line became the nation's first railroad. Show it to you. There's the B&O. Once again, which way is it traveling? From the east to the west. Who's left out? Down south. Sad for the south. All right. Let's talk about factories. Right. You may know about the Industrial Revolution, but you may not know the kind of working conditions and things that were happening. So by 1850, most American manufacturing was no longer done in homes. That's the change from the home economy to the market economy. All right, it's going to be done in these bigger, large centers where we're producing a lot of goods. Right, mid 1800s, factories and machines. What is it called? Called the factory system. Where are you going to find these things? Up in New England. One of the first factory in America is called the Lowell Mill. It's up in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is in New England. So I'm going to use that as a case example to give you a feel for factory life. All right. Who's working there? Young teenage girls. Why? You can pay the teenagers less than you can pay adults. Right. They liked this though because it offered them an opportunity to make some money, become independent, and help their families out. These people lived at the mill. Highly regulated environment. So there was a lot of rules in the workplace. All right. Some of those workers did protest. Strikes were against the wage cuts or the working conditions. By the 1840s and 1850s, mills acquired a more permanent workforce. So they kind of got rid of these younger girls at that point, and they found a better workforce. And at this time, we had Irish immigrant women coming to the country. We had a large, percentage of Irish who were immigrating. They were willing to work for pretty much anything, and they did. They work to support their families, right? What were the conditions? It's bad. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. You don't get a break. All right. So, I mean, that's what's kind of going on there. Give you a couple of pictures, a couple of snapshots. Here's one of the girls working in a factory. There's a spinning loom, and obviously those threads are making that fabric down there. This is probably at the end of the day. I don't know if you know, but you guys take selfies. I look at that girl's face. After you work a 12-hour day, 6 days a week, you're going to look like that too. That's pretty bad. Right? Those girls were not happy, dressed in rags. Man, it's bad. Working conditions are bad. There are some urban problems. Now, urban, once again, city centers, right? By 1860, 9 of the 10 largest cities are in the north. 1840, immigrants are going to make up a huge majority of these populations. We had immigrants coming from Germany, from Ireland, and from Great Britain. There was a big gap between rich and poor. So the rich were the upper class, and the poor were the working class. And I don't think I need to get into too much, how the lives that they were leading. It's pretty bad, right? Private companies in cities provided sanitation and water. Really, if you could afford it, you're going to get a nice bathroom and you're going to get some fresh water. If you couldn't afford it, you were living in the slop. It's pretty bad, all right? Cities are going to be unsafe, and you're not going to see any police forces. So up here until the 1930s, so you can imagine crime is very high, and it's pretty bad, right? Middle class, working class life. Okay, so just looking at the difference between the two kind of social statuses here of where people are, right? Industrialization will change family life and gender roles. Before, families worked together at home. Now they're going to go to work someplace else. So you have working class men and women. They worked a job separated by gender. Men basically go to factories. Women were servants, or women did work in factories and like those textile mills. Middle class men worked in business. The women, they were somewhat educated, somewhat middle class. They got jobs as teachers. And the children, well, working class children are going to help in the household. They may even be out there working. Middle class children went to schools. So they had the time, so they were able to go to the schools and get an education, right? Immigration, who's coming here? You should know the three large groups coming before the Civil War. They came from Ireland, Germany, and Great Britain. They settled in the jobs where? They settled in the north and the west, where they were going to farm or work in factories. They did not settle down south. Make sure you know that. The industrial economy created jobs, so there were few restrictions on immigration. If you were to look at the immigration door, it's wide open. America was allowing these people to come in because we needed them to do the work. All right. Once again, you could sit down and analyze this. Just look at the three colors here. I mean, people are coming from where? They're coming from Ireland, they're coming from Germany, and they're coming from Great Britain. Was there some immigrants from other countries? Sure, but it wasn't really a lot. I mean, the bulk of it was coming from those three countries. And when you look at 20% or more, where were these people settling? Up in the Northeast and up in the Midwest. So the yellow and green areas are areas where those immigrants settled. Very few went down south because there was no jobs, right? Reasons why they came. This is also known as like push or pull factors you might want to be aware of, right? Between 1845 and 1850, millions of Irish came because of the potato famine. There was a boll weevil, there was a crop, and the crop didn't really grow, and all of a sudden there was no food. People starved, people died. Well, you got a choice: stay there and die, or move to another area. They moved, right? Germans came seeking peace and stability, especially after the failed German Revolution of 1848. So they came for some political reasons. They came to get away from the government, right? Why are they coming? Well, most immigrants came because they felt that they had better opportunities here. All right. Once again, where did they settle? Irish tended to settle in the cities. Germans stayed in the cities, but a lot of them moved west to start farming. All right. There will be some difficulties that they faced. All right. A lot of the older immigrants don't like the fact that these new groups are coming. All right. So what was wrong with the Irish? Well, the Irish and some Germans were Catholics. And they're going to face hostility from native-born Americans because most of those native-born Americans are Protestant, all right? The native-born people, the people that are already here, also fear economic competition. These immigrants are willing to come, they're willing to work cheap, they might take my job. So that's the competition. Native-born Americans, they resented the Catholic and Jewish immigrants. Once again, why? Most of the Americans were what? Protestant, right? The term nativism, I want you to define it, you better know it. What that means, and a nativist wants to make laws, wants to benefit the people that are already here. So they don't like immigrants. They are anti-immigrant. They want to make laws that restrict these immigrants and keep them out of the country, right? There was actually a political party called the Know Nothings. And they were the political party formed to support the nativist feelings. They campaigned to restrict the numbers of certain immigrant groups. All right. This is a famous flag that appears. It's about Native Americans. It says, "Beware of foreign influence," and they're really against these foreigners coming into the country. Notice how they did here. They kind of the foreign influence. They wrote that backwards at because these new immigrants weren't going to be able to read and write. Right? Famous sign at this time: "Help wanted. If you're Irish, don't even apply, because we're not going to hire you." Right? This is a real thing. So the Irish were persecuted against because of their religious beliefs, because they were Catholic. Right? There was some contributions though. The Irish came. They were great workers. They helped build railroads. Pretty much the Irish built the Erie Canal. They labored in factories. They were hardworking people, and they contributed to the American development of the early 1800s. The Germans, they brought advanced farming techniques from Germany, plus new ideas on education. So this term right here, if you think about it, Kindergarten. Kindergarten was a German word, and they wanted kids going to school at earlier ages so they can get an education. All right. Before the Germans came, there was no gym class. There wasn't physical education in any of the American schools. They brought that with them. They said that people should be exercising and doing those things. That becomes part of our curriculum today. So yeah, there's your definition of nativism. Once again, they want to limit immigration. All right. There's different patterns of social development in both North and South. All right, I think we got a good feel of the North, so we're going to kind of pay closer attention to the South here. All right, they were traditionally an agricultural center, mostly farming. If you had money down south, you obviously either owned land or owned slaves, probably owned both. All right. The economy was dependent on cotton. There were other crops, rice, tobacco, and indigo, but cotton becomes the major cash crop of the South. And obviously, who's doing the work to harvest that crop? Slave labor. All right. Southern plantation grew slower than in the North because it failed to attract those immigrants. Those immigrants weren't going to catch those jobs on those farms because of slavery, so they took jobs in those northern factories in those northern cities. How big was cotton? Huge. Why? Down south, the climate, the topography, the rainfall, the heat, it favored large farms, plantations. Those are your crops that are going to be grown. Obviously, the biggest one is going to be cotton. All right. Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin, an invention that you should know. You should know Eli Whitney. What it did is it basically was a simple machine that removed the seeds from the cotton. But now farmers needed more raw cotton, so they needed more slaves. Slavery will continue. Here's the cotton gin. Pretty simple. You throw your cotton ball in there. You roll it around. The machine pushes the cotton through this little comb structure here. The seed falls out the one side. The cotton fiber falls out the other side without the seed in it. Now you can take that. You can take that cotton and you could send it to the factory where they're going to make some cloth with it. All right. So cotton as a commercial crop was huge. It stimulated the growth of slavery, linking it firmly to the southern economy. It spurred westward migration, and when farmers went to get more land, planters brought their slaves with them. And what do? They continued to grow more cotton. So you'll see slavery expand into areas like Alabama, Mississippi, later even further into Texas and Louisiana. So slavery will continue to grow. All right. Cotton became important to the national economy. Why? We were selling cotton to Britain. I mean, it was a big export that we had, and we were making a ton of money on it. So these southern planters were like, yo, this cotton thing's working out for us. We're selling it to northern factories. We're selling it to Britain. This is our ticket. All right. Its agricultural base kept the South economically dependent on the North. Why? They weren't independent of the North because they needed the manufactured goods that the North had. They also needed a place to sell their cotton to. So you're not going to find a lot of cotton factories down south or textile mills. They were shipping the cotton to the North to these factories, right? So there's a kind of a little relationship there between North and South. We call this thing King Cotton. All right, why there's like this term, like cotton's huge, right? The South had great conditions for farming, we know that. Their economy developed around farming and slavery. The cotton gin makes cotton profitable, so cotton became their crop, right? Cotton becomes the most valuable product down south. It's kind of redundant, but we're saying the same thing here. Rich landowners have these huge plantations relying on cotton growth. Love this slide, so follow along. Why does cotton grow? Well, South has good conditions. Then they develop a system based on farming and slavery. Then they get the cotton gin, which now they're able to harvest and create this product that's quicker to get to factories. The Industrial Revolution leads to growing textile industries. They need more cotton to make more cloth. Cotton becomes the most valuable product, and then rich landowners, they create these huge plantations and they rely on free labor. So you see that kind of transition there. I mean, that's why cotton became king. Now, slaveholding men dominated the political, economic, social life of the South. If you were a landowner and you owned slaves down south, you're a somebody. If you don't own slaves and you don't own land, you're nobody. Okay? What was life like? Planters' wives and daughters were responsible for the domestic sphere. So the home life, the house, domestic, right? They managed the care, feeding, clothing of their families and slave families. Now, what was life like under slavery? I think you got that idea. It's bad. All right, daily life is pretty difficult. There was no control over your own life, your children's lives, your spouse's life if you were a slave. You were told day to day what to do. You must do what slave owners tell you to do, or there's going to be some repercussions. You're going to get a whipping. Yeah, I mean, you might get less food. It's bad, all right? Work was done from dawn to sunset. So basically, field slaves were made to work when the sun came up to when the sun went down. That's a pretty long, exhausting day. If you were a house slave, well, now you worked well into the night because the master's probably going to have a big dinner and he's going to want you to serve him and all kinds of stuff, right? What was life like? I mean, health and food. Slaves ate inexpensive food. They wore rough clothing. A slave might be, given, 2 pieces of clothing that might have to last you a year. You wore the same thing every day. Cabins housed 1 or 2 families. These cabins were ridden with dysentery and typhoid fever, and I mean, it's bad. Slaves were an economic investment. This affected treatment. So if you were a very, prized field hand, if you were a big buff dude, you might get better treatment because that slave owner needed you to work really hard. So you might get better medical treatment. So more expensive the slave, the better care they got. All right, very cheap slave, not given much of anything. Okay. There were some rules. Slaves could not legally marry. And if they did marry, it was weird. Their wedding vows read, until death or distance do you part. So if someone were to be sold, you automatically would be, granted a divorce and you were free to marry someone else in the next plantation. Families remained as close as they could. A lot of families were sold. Family members were sold, so they were moved around. Children were not educated. Began to work as early as 8 years old. As planters moved west, slaves were bought and sold. Slave families were often, broken up. So it's bad. There were much resistance made. And this is kind of interesting if you really want to learn about slavery. There were many ways for slaves to resist. All right. Most protests took the form of one of these 5. Well, obviously the biggest protest would be get up and leave, right? I mean, you're going to run away. You might even hurt yourself. Self-mutilation so you don't have to work. You can sabotage. You might, break the tool that the owner gave you, and all of a sudden you can't do the work because the tool broke. I don't know how it broke, Work very slow, fake being sick for the day. I mean, there were many ways to protest, all right? Obviously, the biggest would be escaping. Even more bigger than that might be like killing your owner. And I mean, that's a nice way to protest, right? Rebellions were rare. They did happen, but they were rare. Owners feared them. So let's go through three notable rebellions and finish this up for you here today, right? 1800, Gabriel Prosser. Now, Gabriel Prosser was a literate blacksmith. He leads this revolution. Unskilled workers. The plan was leaked. Prosser was grabbed, 25 others were captured, and they hanged every one of them, sending that message to these other slavers, right? Do not even think about rebelling, because this is going to be your fate, okay? But notice he was an educated black man who was a blacksmith, all right? 1822, Denmark Vesey. His plan, he was going to lead a revolution in South Carolina. The revolt was uncovered, so they nabbed him. 5 of his followers were hanged. Once again, sending that message that, you don't do this. By the way, Denmark Vesey was a literate carpenter. Gabriel Prosser was a literate blacksmith. Keep that in mind. Nat Turner, 1831. He does lead a revolution in Virginia. This guy's a little more successful than the other two. He killed over 55, 65 whites, so his revolution was rolling. Obviously, it didn't work out for him. He was tried. He was hanged. They down there in Virginia, they weren't messing around. They killed over 200 slaves in retaliation. So once again, sending the message to other field hands, other slaves, you don't do this, because this is going to be your fate. All right? By the way, Nat Turner was a religious leader. He was an educated religious person. Religion, educated. Well, real quickly, right? What after these rebellions, these slave owners don't want to see this again. So they're going to make strict laws about slavery. They're going to say that freeing slaves is, you're not going to do that. You're going to make that more difficult. Slave owners were really tough. And here's the big one. We don't want slaves to be literate. We don't want to teach them anything. Why? Because those three rebellions were led by literate, smart, black men. And if you teach them anything, they're going to probably not be happy with their situation, and they're going to revolt. So I know there was a lot in here about unity and splits. So you might want to take your time and go through this presentation so you're clear on that information. Best of luck.